Wajigi Khalsa, Wajigi Ki Fateh. My name is Gurinder. I am your host of JMC Chronicles, and we are here with episode 15. And I'm joined by some amazing guests. I'll let them introduce themselves here in a bit. But I just wanted to let you guys all know that we are episode 15. It's coming out a little bit later than usual. Usually it's at the third week of each month. This past month, obviously we had Nishaan, which is the topic and the theme of this episode. We had Nishaan, where it's our high school conference, where kids from all across California come and enjoy the weekend, get to learn a bunch about new things that our community doesn't talk about, and it's just a good chance for them to build their network and get to meet new people from across the state. This year's topic was Beyond the Track, and we'll go a little bit into depth about like what Beyond the Track means and what it means to individually, like all of us, because you can say Beyond the Track and some people don't even know what the track is. So, we'll get into that, and each of us will share about a little bit about our weekend. But yeah, like I said, this is if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for the continued support. If you're hearing us through our audio platforms, thank you for the continued support. We are growing each and every month, and I can't thank all the listeners and all the subscribers and all the downloaders enough. But without further ado, I'll let Jessica introduce herself, and then we can just pass it down, and we'll one by one introduce ourselves.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Grinder, for that intro. A little bit about me. I'm a recent grad from UCLA, where I majored in molecular cell developmental bio, and I'm currently a graduate student at Johns Hopkins, and I'm majoring in regulatory science, and so I'm a part-time regulatory affairs specialist at Medtronic, which is a medical devices company, but we'll get more into that later. I know at Nishaan, we also talked about introducing ourselves and defining ourselves in ways that are, beyond the track. And so in the spirit of that, I guess I would also say that on the side, I'm a coffee enthusiast. I like trying different coffee places around the Bay, around LA. Yeah, I don't, I guess I still have to work on defining myself like beyond the track. But how about you, Praveena?
In the same spirit, I am a food enthusiast. I love checking out cool new restaurants. I'm a car enthusiast, love JDM cars, and I'm a travel enthusiast. But as for the on the track stuff, I graduated from UC Davis in 2019. I'm currently in my gap years, working as a clinical psychology researcher. And the goal at the end of my tracks is med school and medicine.
All right, so I guess I'll take it from there. Thank you, Gurinder, for having us. Really appreciate that. So my name's Mukul. I'm a third-year student at UCLA. I'm studying econ, minoring in accounting and labor studies. And kind of on the aspect of beyond the track, I would say I'm pretty adventurous and I love nature. I enjoy going camping, hiking, rafting, all those things like in the summer. Try to go every year, but lately we haven't been able to because like COVID and stuff like that. But plans beyond college and stuff like that, I'm actually really grateful to have been part of the discussion of Beyond the Track, because even as a third year at UCLA, I'm kind of on the same page still. It's like, dang, like there's something that I thought I wanted to do, but now it's kind of like not sure where I really want to go. So hoping to figure that out very soon as well.
No, and I think thank you guys all for sharing and introducing yourselves, and especially in the different ways, because one of the things we did talk about this on Nishaan weekend was introducing ourselves doesn't really mean just introducing ourselves in terms of what college we go to, what our job is. Like, we are so much more than just those things, but it's like something in our community is like, we have to introduce ourselves like that, because like, that's the only thing that kind of matters. And, that's one of the things that we try to expand on for, especially for like high school kids, because we don't want them to get into the thing of like the only thing that defines them is like what their job is or what their like school is. But I've introduced myself every single episode, but I'll introduce myself in a different way here as well. I'm a podcast enthusiast, hence why we started this podcast, and I host it. I'm also a nature enthusiast. I love hiking. I love getting outdoors. I think that's my one way to kind of give myself a break from everything else, because everything else I do is indoors. So, going outside, being in nature is something that I enjoy, and it gives me a mental break from everything. And yeah, there's so much more. I also love going to new restaurants. Ever since I've come to Davis, I usually try a new restaurant every single week. That's just like, something to try to get myself out there, and also just, explore what's out there here in Davis. But yeah, I think that'll I've introduced myself many times, but that was a different way of introducing myself. But Moko, I'll start off with you. And you talked a little bit about, being in UCLA, it's your third year, and, being involved in these conversations. How did you like initially hear about Jakara, and like as a whole, like Jakara movement as a whole, and like to go even one further like that? And then how did you like end up hearing about Nishaan and like applying to be a facilitator?
So basically, I did hear about Jakara in high school and stuff like that when obviously like Nishaan was happening. People from my school and like people that I knew would go, but I didn't really get involved in it then. But when I came to UCLA, actually, I became really good friends with Harmon, who works with Jakara. I mean, everybody knows him. And so he was a fourth year at the time, and I was a first year, and he was kind of starting up JMC at UCLA at the time, and he was really trying to get me involved with Jakara. And like that was actually the first time he told me about Nishaan. He wanted me to come that year as well, but things just didn't line up well, and I wasn't able to come that year. COVID happened the next year, and so didn't attend the online one. But this year around, Harmon was really on hounding me about like kind of coming this year, and we actually were having like the beyond the track conversations prior to even knowing what the theme was this year. So I guess everything worked out, timing worked out, and so came to Jakara this year, and came to Nishaan this year, and kind of started getting involved more with Jakara. And honestly, I'm really grateful for that, and I really wish that I listened to Harmon my first year, and also even like got involved earlier in high school. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I joined like 5 years ago, and I'm just like beyond thankful, and will forever be thankful for, joining all those years past. But Praveena, I just, want to extend the same question to you. Like, how did you get involved with Jakara, or how did you even hear about Jakara movement? And then to go one further, obviously, again, to like, how did you hear about Nishaan and end up facilitating?
Yeah, so I actually didn't get involved with Jakara until after college. My high school didn't have an SHSS chapter. I went to Yuba College and then Davis, and Jakara really hadn't gotten big at those schools yet, so I didn't know about it. So when everything was happening with the farmer protest, I, like many others, was glued to my phone, always looking at updates, and a bunch of Jakara posts on Instagram popped up. So I started looking into it. I went to one of the SAC missile meetings, and then I was basically hooked after that. Nishaan, same thing. I'd hear about it on Instagram in missile meetings. And at first I was really hesitant because I'm a bit of an introvert. I'm really shy when I meet new people. So I was like, do I really want to do this? I don't know. And then Mandeep, the Sacramento community organizer, reached out to me, was like, hey, I think you should do this. And I was like, well, I can't say no now. Let's do it. And so I signed up.
Yeah. And, I'll let you, could you just go a little bit in depth? Because I know we've talked about JMC, because I've been a part of it for the last 2 years now, and I've explained a little bit what JMC is. Do you mind sharing a little bit about like SAC Missile and like what that is, and like who can join, and like the work that you guys do being the SAC Missile?
Absolutely. So the missile is basically everything after college. So once people graduate college, it's a way for them to still keep in touch with Jakara, keep in touch, and serve the community. And it's really cool because after you graduate, people get careers, people start families. There's so many other things going on. So with the missile, it's you put in as much time as basically you want to. There's no commitment or anything like that. So it's really convenient for people out of college to still be able to be involved, but also keep up with everything else that's going on in their lives at the time. A lot of the stuff we do in the missile is really member-led. Our members will just get these awesome ideas that they'll bring up in missile meeting, and the rest of us will be like, hey, yeah, let's do it. So we've done educational events over Zoom on things like mental health and domestic violence awareness. We're hoping to do things in person, COVID willing, in the near future. Just a lot of ways in general to help the community once you're done with high school and college.
Yeah. Funny story is that I went to the first ever Sacramento meeting that we had. It was me, Mandeep, the Sacramento community organizer, and two other people. There was a total of like 4 of us, and we met at Roseville Gurdwara. It was, it was good to see like something was starting to happen there, and all props to Mandeep for pushing for it and like going forward with it, even though like there's only a couple people that turned out in the beginning, and he was persistent with it, and it's become something to where I see usually on like on Instagram that like the SAC Missile is doing so many different things, a conversation around mental health, and other workshops and getting to know one another, which is I think is key, because like we feel like our network building ends after college, which is like completely false. Like your network is just starting to build in college, and then after college is where you actually start building it even more. But like there's this misconception of like college is going to be like the last point where you get to meet like new people, and after that it's just going to be like work people that you're only going to work like know like work friends that you're only going to meet at like work. But like it's kind of more than that, and that's what the SAC Missile's goal was, to like try to bring in people that have already graduated that might not have like the chance because JMC was not on their campus or it was starting when they left, to like bring them back in and have them help out and help their community and give back to them in some way. And then lastly, I'll throw it to you, Jessica, about how did you hear about Jakara movement, and how did you get involved, and how did you end up coming to Nishaan and being a facilitator?
Yeah, so the way I heard about Jakara is very similar to Mukul. Harmon taught me or introduced me to the work that Jakara was doing back in college. And I remember he tried to start a JMC at UCLA too. So I heard about Jakara that way. And then I was also introduced to the work that they were doing for high schoolers in terms of their college events that they hold for high schoolers, like the different colleges. Like people will come from different colleges and give their perspectives based on their experiences. And so I was involved in a couple of those events. And then as for Nishaan, again, like Harmon introduced me to what Nishaan was, and that it was like an opportunity to be able to share your perspectives and facilitate these, very difficult conversations with high schoolers. And I think that with any opportunity that I'm involved in with Jakara, it's always been an opportunity to give to high schoolers or give to the youth what I wish I could have had back in the day, to be able to have mentorship and to have these spaces where I know that I'm not alone in any of the things that I'm facing in life. I think I would have really liked that as a kid. And so I really appreciate being able to have spaces like that for the youth as they're growing up. So yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people, when you hear like folks now, or they're like as Praveena, folks that weren't able to be part of Jakara or have this type of support when they were going through the process, they like, the one thing I keep hearing is repetitive is like, oh, I wish I had this and my time. And that's something I think brings all of us back. Like all of us volunteered to go to Nishaan and become facilitators. And for those who don't know what a facilitator is, facilitator is that you're in charge of, or you and a co-facilitator have a group of kids, high schoolers, for the weekend, where you get into like smaller groups of like 8 to 10 high schoolers, and you have kind of a open space for those high schoolers to kind of open up and share about like about specific topics that, we're taught and we do training for. And we get into those small groups for an hour, hour and a half, and we really just allow the high schoolers to have a voice in that time and space, and then give them the space to say whatever they want. And that, like, those are where you get a lot of openness from high schoolers, where usually if you just go up to a high schooler and you start asking, like, open up, they immediately shut away, and then they like run away as fast as possible. So, like, having these spaces is very crucial for high schoolers, and that's more or less what facilitating groups are. So Jessica, I just wanted to ask you, like, so how was your facilitator groups like, and what's something, like, you took away from your group? Because for me, when I do facilitating, I've done it now 3 times, I've always learned so much from the high schoolers themselves, which is like something that I think we don't realize is, like, high schoolers, even though they're young, they can still teach or have a perspective that you never thought of, and that in some way is learning. So I just wanted to ask you, like, what's some, like, how your group was in the weekend, what's something that you took away from your group discussions?
Right. Like, my group, I would say, like, I mean, they were great. They were very, like, quiet and shy, on the first day, and then the second day they really opened up as the conversations got deeper. It's just like you said, like, they're very young, but at the same time, they're so much more mature than I think that they give themselves credit for. And there's a lot that we can learn from them, even engaging in those tough conversations. We think that we're facilitating conversations with them, but in reality, there's so much to learn in the way that they start interacting with each other and back with you when you're asking them those tough questions. And so one thing that I really learned from them is that, sorry,
Okay.
I cut out.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that you can learn from them is that, like, these conversations that we're having, these topics, like, they're very difficult, they're very tough, but they span beyond generations. These sort of, I guess you could say, like, the struggles, they are kind of universal when you talk about it, whether it's like the struggle for, political liberation, when we talk about Deep Sidhu, whether it's the struggle with, with the struggle with, like, drugs, when we had the fentanyl topic, things like that. I think that these topics are so multifaceted, and they're so they sort of impact each other, and you can see that in the way that these kids open up about their own, like, their own personal, like, histories. They have, like, family members who've been through these things. They've had friends who've gone through a lot of things. And so I think that's one thing that I definitely took away from my group, is that you think that you may have gone through these things, but even it's crazy to think that even these kids who are, like, so much younger have also been through and have experience with, like, the topics that we're talking about.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we were co-facilitators, so everything you just echoed, I witnessed the entire thing myself. So I mean, I can't say it any better than you said it. But Praveena, I just want to ask you the same question about, like, how your group was. What's something that you took away from this weekend, or, like, from your discussions with, like, your high school kids, and what, like, basically stood out to you this on that weekend?
My group was amazing. We went over really tough topics to talk about, intergenerational trauma, mental health, and these students had known me and my co-facilitator less than 24 hours before they were saying lots of things about their own experiences in their family, some really good self-reflection going on in these chats. And I think the biggest things that I took away from this is I was just in awe of how much they've already thought about these things and are thinking about ways to move our community forward and the work that needs to be done. And just really the power of having such a safe, non-judgmental place to just talk and have these really important conversations. It was it was really powerful. And even though it was just 2 days, we learned so much about each other. And that stays with you for a long time, those conversations.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I've mentioned it early in the episode, but like all three of you, this was your guys' first Nishaan, right? If I'm being from my knowledge, right? So it's like for you guys are experiencing this whole thing for the first time. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have all of you on, is to give a kind of a first time viewpoint of Nishaan, especially from a facilitator standpoint, because believe it or not, facilitators take away just as like we might not take as much away as high schoolers are, because they're learning so many new things, but we take away so many things that are on a personal connection level with high schoolers, and even with like the topics themselves. We're not no experts of the topics that are being held there. I think even every single Nishaan I go to, I start questioning what my thought process is, especially hearing different viewpoints, hearing different things that are out there for us. So because sometimes like the high schoolers look to us like we have all the answers in life. That's far from the truth, unfortunately. Like I wish I had all the answers to life. I don't think any of us do. So we're more or less in the same boat, and I think that kind of speaks volumes. And Praveena, like you said, like these conversations lead to so much more, and to have these conversations for them at such like a younger age than where we're at is just starts the conversations even at an earlier stage that can continue for so much longer. And then Mokul, I just wanted to ask you lastly, like how your facilitator group was, and what's something that you took away from your group and your discussions.
Thank you. Also first before starting, I just want to shout out my co-facilitator Simran. I mean, it was my first time facilitating, so it was a little bit of a daunting experience, but she made it really easy, and it was super dope. But kind of piggyback off of what you said, Jessica said, and Praveena said, like, my group was also a bit timid at first, and this kind of lasted through both days. Maybe like a quieter group, but once one person had started to initiate the conversation, kind of chimed in on what they think, then people started opening up, which was super cool to hear because at that point we were able to get like really fruitful conversations. I think one big thing that I took away, and this is kind of adding to what Jessica and Praveena said, is that despite the fact that a lot of us have these like similar lived experiences at home, whether that be for like mental health or the intergenerational trauma and bad habits we talked about, for me, there were so many things that like the kids mentioned that like I didn't even think that these fell into these I guess categories, for the lack of a better word, because I had learned that these things were so normal and like this is how things were supposed to be. And despite those similar experiences too, it was really eye-opening to see how unique each student kind of like reacted to or dealt with or talked about these things. Like everyone brought like their own, like nugget of life, I guess, to the conversation.
Yeah, and I think again, like Jessica can speak a little bit more, and I'll let her talk a little bit more about this. Like our group, we had folks in the beginning that kind of seemed like they were into it. First they didn't want to like open up, but then as our first day went on, and they started opening up a little bit more, especially to our second day. It was like me and Jessica, obviously we like debriefed afterwards talking about it. This was like my first time where, after like we've been together for so long as a group, like they were actually like upset that this was going to be like our last time together, which usually you have your Nishaan withdrawals as the whole weekend, but this was like my first time seeing like a group get like upset, because like when I announced that like our last workshop was our last workshop together, like I could hear like the sadness in the whole room, and they were all upset. And Jessica, I'll let you talk a little bit more about like our group, talking about like how they opened up and having these conversations. Or one of the first, like on the first day we talked about mental health and discrimination, and the second day we talked about allyship. And I'll let you talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, with our group, it's crazy because they're very quiet. They're still very young, and we always say that like oh, like, they just haven't lived the experience yet. And so, they may not be able to relate to the topics that we are presenting, especially because those topics can be so tough, like, when we're talking about mental health or, like drugs or alcoholism, things like that in our community. But honestly, I think that even when the students are like quiet, they're just absorbing everything like a sponge. Like they are listening to everything, they're listening to your experiences. They're listening to the facilitators, in our group lectures, and they're really internalizing those topics because at the end of Nishaan, just like how you mentioned, like they were very upset that it was ending. But later on, like individually, I like learned from all of them. They all came up to me and, they were like, oh, like, it's crazy that we talked about so and so, such and such a topic because I've been through this. And you really hit a string with me here because, this topic means so much to me. And so you really had an impact on me here. And so, despite them like being quiet all weekend, they're listening and they're internalizing all of these things. And hopefully, I mean, you know, hopefully they take these topics and these conversations with them beyond just this weekend. But yeah, it's so like rewarding to have them in a way like upset at the end because it's like I know that I'll miss you, but it's so nice to know that you'll actually miss me now too. It makes it feel like it makes everything worth it. It makes opening up about these like hard topics and things like that like you feel like you've actually made a tangible difference, if only for like 2 days.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like, it gives us like a little bit like as facilitators, you don't know how much you want to open up, how much you don't want to open up, how much you want to bring somebody else to open up, and then you start thinking like, oh, am I pushing this person too much? Am I pushing this person too less? Like, there's a fine line of like of that. And you guys can all talk about this, but like for me, because I facilitated in the past, like I kind of knew where that fine line was, and I was like, and Jessica, you were there and you witnessed this. Like I started opening up a little bit myself to like my own person. Like I try to relate to the topic as much as I could, and then that way that gave them like a set of example of like, okay, this person's opening up to us, that we can open up to this person as well in this setting as well, because they're comfortable in like opening up and they're trusting us to keep their secrets, or like they're or trusting us to like keep the space in that space only. So and especially again, like the topics we talk about are not easy topics, and Praveena or Mukul, either one, either one you guys can go first. But one of the workshops that like stood out to you, or like you guys were surprised that like the high schoolers kind of opened up more than you had initially thought? Because when me and Jessica were like game planning or like thinking about like what we can do, we can only like prepare so much. It's only like when we get into it and like into that moment, into that workshop, like we'll see where it goes. And I just wanted to hear like what workshop was it for you guys to where you guys realized that okay, like there's a lot here that we can talk about and dive deeper into basically. And Praveena, if you want to start first.
I think for me and my group, it was the advocacy and allyship workshop. Unfortunately, I think everyone at some point in their high school experience sees bullying, sees something going on that shouldn't. And we really just started out sharing those experiences, what we'd seen, what maybe we ourselves had experienced, and then going into the ways that you can be an ally for others if you see something happening. They really got into it. You could tell that they were paying attention, that they were really looking at the different options and how they could apply it in real life. And at the end, my co-facilitator, Harmon, and I let them do a skit to kind of practice putting that into effect and being allies. And they just got so into it. You could tell they were really trying to, come up with a plot and be really good allies. So I was just really proud of them, and I could see that they were learning things that they were going to take into the future and apply, and that really meant a lot.
That's so great to hear, especially like improvisation. Like we said, like you can game plan as much as you want for these workshops, but like something just happens, and then you like you think of ideas at the moment, and as your guys' first time facilitating, you guys could have like been a little bit shy. I don't shy away from like trying to improvise as much, especially like because you just don't know where the conversation's going to go or like how much your group's going to open up. I can share a little bit about like our group when we were talking about our discrimination workshop. I did not know, and I was not ready whatsoever to like have our group like at like each of them were raising their hands at like different points. Like everybody wanted to speak, everybody wanted to share, and we got like I know we were talking about discrimination in so many different levels, but everybody like all the groups started sharing about like our gender discrimination in our community, which is very prevalent, and it's something that still happens like to this day and heavy amounts. And so like to see like and I'm a little bit older than these kids, obviously. So like I thought it would be like a little bit less, like as because we're growing up here, things are changing with the time, or you think those things, but like to have the high schoolers like wanting to share out, and like each of them was like raising their hands over and over again to like just talk about a different story or what they've seen, family wise, friends wise at the Gurdwara, what they've seen. It was like kind of for me was eye opening, and it took like I just sat back and started listening, and I just wanted to hear everything they had to say, and I wanted to let them get a chance to speak as well, because like when I brought up the workshop, at first they were kind of like hesitant to speak, and then all of a sudden when like one person shared and two people shared, all their hands started going up. And for me that was like the workshop. I was like, okay, this like this group is going to be able to share and also take and listen to one another as well. And then Mokul, I'll ask you what I asked Praveena. What workshop for you stood out from that weekend? What workshop like kind of opened your eyes a little bit, seeing like, oh, like the kids really are engaged in this conversation?
And I think when you asked Praveena that question, the first thing that I thought about was exactly what you were talking about, the discrimination and prejudice kind of workshop. And it was really dope to see, even in the big group discussion where we were all in the lecture hall, where how kind of people were thinking really critically about even the smallest of like kind of microaggressions to like the biggest things that kind of plague our kind of world today. And I felt like these students were really far ahead from where I was at their age, and that was super cool to see for sure. And it was also something that I realized while sitting in that lecture, that I wish that these important topics are things that I wish I had discussed or been encouraged to talk about or learn about with my community, like kind of where I grew up with my friends and things like that. Because I feel like that really changes the trajectory of like how kind of people think and talk as they grow up for sure. And focusing on like my group itself, everyone was very engaged with this conversation more than the others, and kind of chimed in with their personal experiences or things that they had seen happen in the real world. And one thing that we went really in depth about was the example about the police officer, where if you had seen like the police on the street, like how would you react, and what steps would you take to engage and whatnot. And this really allowed us to have deeper conversations about the systems behind those things. And it was cool to hear them talk about and kind of provide their perspective, and also allowed me to share my perspective on it as well, which is super cool.
Yeah, again, thank you all for sharing as much as you guys are, because I think these are conversations, and I think we talked about how we want to keep these conversations just not at Nishaan or that weekend. We want the high schoolers to take these conversations and take them to their houses, start the conversations with their parents, start conversations with their friends that didn't come to Nishaan. This is the only way we'll be able to go forward as a community, is if we carry these conversations, because at Nishaan we only had around 100 to 120 kids. So like that's not the whole community, right? There's so many more people out there that are not involved in these conversations, or not even thinking about these conversations. So having these 120, even if they go reach out one person, that's already double the amount of people before Nishaan that were thinking about these topics, about mental health, which is something that this podcast has had multiple episodes about, because I'm very passionate about mental health. I think that mental health awareness is key, and it's something that as a whole general world and a community, like a whole wide world community, doesn't even still understand to a certain extent. But even like our Punjabi community, even less than that. Like it's very minute or not relevant at all. So that's why, taking these conversations and taking them one step further is the goal of this podcast, and the goal of hopefully that every student does after they leave Nishaan. And so I think, Jessica, I'll let you share what stood out to you from our discussions as well, because I know we talked in depth about our group. So I'll let you share a little bit about your experiences in the group and what stood out to you.
Yeah, I mean, just to like echo off what everybody else has said, like I think the discrimination talk really hit a chord with these students because, we mentioned it in one of the group lectures that you can simultaneously be the oppressor and the oppressed at the same time. And so I think everybody in that room at some point in their lives has um, has been the victim of oppression in some way, and they've also witnessed others be oppressed. And so whether we are talking about gender discrimination, caste discrimination, these are things that um, are super prevalent, like especially in our Punjabi community. And so with our students, I think we had 5 girls and 2 guys. And so the gender topic was definitely like something that we touched on a lot. The GARs in our group loved sharing out, in my experience, this has happened, this is how my family, operates. And it's crazy because they were bouncing ideas off each other, their experiences. They were like, oh, I've heard that too. This saying, I've heard my parents say this too. I've heard, my bua, my fufu, and so it's so nice to be able to, have these spaces where they know that they're not alone in facing that discrimination or in witnessing it, where they know that the people around them, whether it's the same age or even, hearing us and our experiences, that this is a struggle that is intergenerational, and that whether it's caste or gender, that it's on us and it's our responsibility now to be breaking and to be talking about these topics and breaking those intergenerational curses, right? But yeah, it was amazing to be able to talk about, especially caste. In our group lecture, I know Manmeet was like very passionate about caste discrimination, and so I think the kids picked up on that, and they picked up on their energy, and that was definitely carried over into our group discussions. And so, but yeah, I think hearing these conversations, and then also imbuing some gurmat, some gurbani into it too. I think the kids it really fueled and made for a really good space to engage in.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that that weekend was like very special to us in our own different ways, because we all had our own different facilitating groups, we had our own discussions, but the learning aspect of the weekend brings us all together, like to come as one. Like at the end of the day at Nishaan, because at the end of the day, we're all coming to have and facilitate these conversations, especially us as facilitators here. Like we volunteer our time, we take time out of our schedules and go out there for a weekend to have these conversations, learn and get to know these high schoolers and be something to them. I mentioned this in an earlier podcast before, like why I continue to keep going to Nishaan over and over again every single year. This past one was my 5th one, which it's insane to think back that I've been to 5 already, right? But I think for my first one was as a participant, and it really left a mark on me in terms of the facilitators and the older people and the older folks that were there as my time as a participant. And they instilled some confidence into me that I carry with me to this day. And the reason why I go back every single year is to try to be that for somebody else. And I think I kind of saw that happen before my eyes. One of our high schoolers in our group, it was lunchtime, and everybody else, when I had said that it was lunchtime, everybody else ran out. but he stayed back and he still wanted to ask me more about like open up me about myself. And that made me really happy and also like very emotional, because I was like, somebody is staying back, because everybody else ran out the door when they heard that lunch was ready. But he stayed back and he wanted to talk to me and ask me more questions about my own personal life and how much I was opening up. So like that made me really happy, and that like I kind of saw that like I am here and I'm instilling some type of confidence, or like helping somebody out this weekend, and that made my entire weekend worth it. I was like, even after that, I was like, my weekend's been made already by this just simple conversation. Him just staying back for like 2-3 minutes has made my entire weekend. So I was like, anything else after this is just it's just extra, and I would be happy, like I would just be even more happy than happier than I already am. So, but all of us touched on about having this welcoming space, especially creating this welcoming space in our facilitating groups. I just want to ask you now this question to you guys is like, describe like how you guys felt this at Nishaan. Like, did you guys feel at home? Did you guys feel welcome? Was there any times where you like, coming into it, you might have thought like, did something's change? You're coming in, you might have been like, oh, I don't know if like people are going to talk to me. I don't know if I'm going to be an outcast. Sometimes coming to these events, especially at this scale, you can be like, oh, I'm probably just going to be somebody that like nobody like, remembers, or nobody talks to, or nobody's like, pay attention to. But like, Mukul, I'll let you start a little bit, because we got a chance to talk a little bit, and I could see how excited you were like every single day when I got to see you, or get to like meet and talk to you every single day. So I'll let you like start off and thinking about like coming into the event, what were you thinking, and like at the event, what you were thinking, what's like now looking back, what's your thoughts?
So kind of going into it, I think the first question that I asked Harmon was like, do you think I can do it? Like I kind of have some trouble talking in public spaces, and like I'm a little shy at first as well. And so I definitely think it was a very like kind of like I mentioned before, kind of like a daunting experience. Like I thought it would be like a daunting experience, but honestly, it was absolutely amazing from start to finish. I think having only going in knowing like 2 or 3 people, and like Jessica was one of them, I found myself kind of really gravitating towards them like towards the beginning of the weekend, but towards the end I was able to make other connections with whether students or staff, facilitators, volunteers, and whatever it may be. And so I think that was super cool. But this was like beyond that, this was like my first time in like a sick space at this like level, and it felt really right, and it really felt like a home for sure. And like I mentioned at like our debrief after as well, like I'm definitely hooked, and like I definitely want to be back in these spaces and back with these people like year after year, or event after event for that matter.
Yeah, see you at the next 5 Nishans, right? I'll be there, hopefully.
I know.
5, I already went to 5, hopefully 5 more. Praveena, I'll because you've had a little bit, you said like before or like during college you didn't really was involved with Jakara, but you've recently been with the SAC Missile, and you can talk about more, like you can talk about both, like Nishaan and how you felt at Nishaan, and also how you feel like incorporating with the SAC Missile, because I know it's a little bit daunting to at Nishaan it's more like high schoolers, but at SAC Missile is like a little bit older folks, so you can dive into either one or both. I would love to hear both, to be honest.
Yeah, I can start out with Nishaan. So like I mentioned before, I can be very shy when I meet new people. So going in, I was like, I only know 2 people. What am I gonna do? There's so many people that I don't know. I was messaging my co-facilitator, who I also had never met before. Shout out to Harmon. He was like, yeah, I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. And I was like, thank you. You got this. I'll just be here supporting you. But when I got there, it was so welcoming. It honestly was amazing support from both like other facilitators, students. I was like, wait, no, I've got this. Like I can actually co-facilitate instead of kind of taking a little bit of a backseat. And I'd been in so many spaces before where they say, oh yeah, we want to make everyone feel included, but it doesn't really happen. But at Nishaan, I saw people going out of their way to go check in with people who were sitting by themselves, or maybe like seemed lonely. And it's just that extra effort to make everyone feel included. And like Mukul said, there was a connection there that, you know, you really felt like you were part of the space, part of the group that was perfect for my little introverted heart. So that for me was definitely not what I expected in the best way. And then when it came to the SAC missile, yeah, I was new to Jakarta, didn't know anything about it. Going to my first meeting, I was panicking because, you know, there's people from all walks of life. There are people who just freshly got out of college, people who have an established like career and family already. So it was daunting to say the least. And I was like, ooh, I'm just gonna sit back and observe for a little while. But I got pulled into conversations left and right, and it was amazing. And there was just this energy of like, we still want to be a part of the community, we still want to stay connected, we still want to make a difference. And so before I knew it, we were all bouncing ideas off each other. Hey, we can do this. Hey, the community needs this. Hey, you know, this would be a great idea. Cool, let's make it happen. And it's like that energy is very central to Jakarta, whether you're looking at like the SHSS, the JMC, the missile. It's everyone's there voluntarily. Everyone's there because they want to be there and they want to make a difference. And that's just so good for someone coming in new and not knowing a lot. You just feel so welcomed so quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing is like, no matter what level you join at, as long as you join, that's the biggest thing, right? Don't be like, oh, like, I mean, I'm so happy that Praveena, like you joined the SAC missile because that was something that was incorporated like not too long ago. And so, you know, these are new things to keep people coming back because people for grad students so for some reason like grad students are not considered like college kids almost sometimes, like when you're at clubs and stuff like that, like, you know, you're seen as these like people that like you can't come and like chill with the undergrads or whatever. So it's like, you know, the SAC missile allows for folks that maybe you're just taking gap years or you've graduated your undergrad but you still want to be a part of it, but you don't have like a, you know, a college campus to call home anymore. So that was the whole point behind the SAC missile. So I was like, it's just so happy to see now like where it's going. And like, you know, I had a couple people that were a part of our Antelope SHS recently. We started it like 4 years ago now, 5 years I think now. And back then it was like it was brand new territory for all of us. We had never even understood what Jakara was. And as high schoolers, we were trying to make these campuses or like these clubs at our campus. And it was just, you know, a daunting task to have for like high schoolers. But like, you know, years later for me to come back and have a podcast with somebody that's been at that club now and see like, you know, how much they're taking what we basically started all those years ago and what they've done now going forward is like, it made me happy again because it just goes to show you it doesn't matter where you start, when you start, as long as you do start and you leave some type of like path for somebody else to come, somebody else will take what you did and go the extra mile after that. So thank you for, you know, sharing for both your Nishaan experience and your SAC missile experience, because I think those are two very key things. And then Jessica, I'll ask you lastly about, you know, describe how you felt coming into Nishaan, how you feel like, you know, after being there, and yeah, I'll let you share.
Yeah, I mean, the environment just going in, starting off, like the first minute that you enter that space, it's so loving. Like everybody wants to meet everybody. Everybody's looking to make friends. Like random people will come up to you, and it's encouraged to have just conversations about just anything. And so it's such an amazing like space, connecting with people. I mean, like I already knew Mukul, but you know, I got to spend time with him and have these conversations with him this weekend. I got to meet you, Grinder, Praveena, right? Like, I feel like you can connect with people on a whole different level just because that's the kind of space that it is, and same with like the high school students as well. And I think it's really interesting because as a facilitator, or at least as a first-time facilitator, like it's interesting because you're trying to, you know, you're taking in this very new space, but you're also in a position of like leadership, and so we're like kids are looking to you for answers, and so you're trying to strike this balance between being new in this space, like also being a student in this space while being in charge of students and facilitating their conversations, but I think the nature of like the space being so open and vulnerable, it definitely helped find that like that balance. But yeah, it was amazing. Like I didn't know what to expect going in, but it exceeded like all expectations. Like everybody's so nice, like everybody's so welcoming. Everybody is so open to hearing your stories and interested in hearing your experiences that you can't really find that kind of energy anywhere else. And I feel like that's definitely something that's going to draw me to future events, like future Jakara events too.
Yeah. And it always, Praveena has said like Harmon being her co-facilitator, having somebody there to like kind of, I don't want to say guide, but like, always be there for you to like lean on no matter what. Jessica, I'll let you please talk because, we talked about this, but at some point, like, I stepped back and let you just run things. And, I kind of like threw in the deep end, but like, you're just amazing and you were able to cope and you did an amazing job with it. And, getting to know you this weekend was like beyond amazing because before then, we had talked because you had come on to be our UCLA representative when we did our virtual college tours last year, where we basically held Zooms and we invited folks from like different campuses to come and talk about their campuses to high school students. And Jessica was was the one that volunteered for UCLA, and I kind of like that's where we kind of met, but we hadn't like actually met. We hadn't like had a conversation or anything like that. And then like we luckily got like co-facilitated or like actually no, before that you had posted something and it really resonated with me, so I DM'd you and we had like a whole conversation about that. But that was like the only time we've actually like talked outside of like before Nishaan. So I was like seeing that you were like my co-facilitator, I was like excited because I was like, oh, this gets like one, it forces me to like hang out with somebody that I don't know completely, which was like is always fun and also scary because you're just like, I don't know what to expect from this person because I don't know this person. But I think when I was paired up with you, because we've had that little conversation already, I was just like, okay, I already know like this is going to be a great pairing. And I think Praveena, you said the same thing about like you meeting Harmon. Like at first you didn't know like who Harmon was, you didn't you were kind of scared of like you didn't know how things were going to go, but then having him there kind of gave you the confidence to kind of in yourself to be like, okay, I don't just need to rely on him, but like his confidence in me can allow me to basically facilitate and get a little bit better and like, not just have to take a backseat. So I think those things, those kind of stories and those kind of connections, maybe they're forced, but like we don't like looking back, like we don't take it as forced. We take it as an opportunity to like meet somebody new, get to know somebody, and that's how I see it. And I think that's how all of us see it is like even though we were kind of forced to be together this weekend, it's like just these connections outside of it are going to last much longer. And I just wanted to talk about, our theme was about beyond the track, and beyond the track can mean so many things to so many people. But the track that we were talking about is like, your parents or, even in school and elementary school, you're told like doctor, lawyer, engineer, like these, like, these famous or like put on a pedestal type jobs that like every parent like wants their child to be, or like majority of parents, because I don't want to put every parent in this conversation, but majority of parents kind of put those jobs as a pedestal, albeit might not even know what it takes to get to those jobs, or might not even know what those jobs really mean, but because they know by name what those jobs are, those are like, that's called like the track. And beyond the track is like exploring what's outside of those, because there is jobs outside of those three jobs. I hate to break it to you if you didn't if you didn't know that there's just not those three jobs that exist in this world. And whenever I talk, like when my mom was asking me like what I wanted to do, and she was like, Dr. Niban, I was like, if all of us became doctors, then who would be the patient, right? And so that was like the joke I always made with my mom, and that would be like my way to like scurry away from the conversation of like her trying to make me into a doctor. I was like, if every parent made their kid into a doctor, then who would be like the patient, right? So I know that's like the worst way to, like talk to it with your parents, but that was my way of coping with like trying to get away from the track as fast as I could. But I wanted to ask like individually to you guys, because this would be like something like, as overall for Nishaan itself, like, talk a little bit about your guys' track, what you guys are thinking, maybe, talk even more about like a little bit about how your track, maybe your thought process kind of changed after this weekend, or if like you're on those like traditional track, like, is it self-motivation? Is it motivation from outside? Whatever you guys want to share, but this is a great way to like recap the weekend. Jessica, if you want to start first, just talk about like, your track, how that track came to be. And yeah, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, I mean, my situation is kind of interesting. I don't know whether I'm on the track or off the track, right? But to give you a little background, so growing up, the way that I went into like regulatory affairs essentially and medical devices is that I have a younger sister, again, who's like type 1 diabetic. And this is just like 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have the medical devices, the medical technology to be able to help people who are type 1 diabetic. And so whether that meant, manual insulin shots or physically poking fingers, lanceting fingers for CGMS or for glucose monitoring every, like every other hour. So I saw like her struggle when we were kids and the way that, it was a struggle for her to live life like normally. But as time went on, technology advanced and we have, things like insulin pumps for her to be able to administer insulin normally and CGMS devices for her to be able to avoid those pinpricks like every hour. And so it changed the quality like of her life and like our lives as well, like as her family. And so I knew that I wanted to do something in terms of medical devices or biotechnology. So I knew that I wasn't going to be a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. But my mom is also in biotechnology. And so she's the one who kind of told me about this track. So I guess she kind of went off the tracks and I'm following her off the tracks, if that makes sense. But in college, I was interested in science, but I knew that I didn't want to be like a lab researcher. I didn't want to, spend 5, 6 years doing a PhD doing lab research. And so the alternative to that was that I discovered that I was also interested in business and like law and its intersection with science. And so that's kind of like what regulatory affairs is basically you're working with regulatory agencies in the US, for example, it's like FDA. In Canada, it's Health Canada. And you are working with those regulatory agencies to ensure that the devices that you're selling, that you want to put on the market are safe and effective. And so you're trying to explain to them, science in a way that that they can understand even without a science background. So you're still using your science degree, but you're also keeping, regulations and laws in mind as you're developing the product, and you're keeping business in mind because again, this is at the end of the day, it's still business. You're caring for your patients, but it's biotechnology. You have a business to run as well, and so that's kind of what I'm doing. Yeah, I don't know whether it's on the tracks or off the tracks. I feel like that's sort of like something that I've had to think about after this weekend. It's definitely something that I'm passionate about. But I feel like all the conversations that we had this weekend were definitely to be consistently thinking about whether your career path is something that you genuinely want to do, if you can see yourself doing this in like 10, 15 years or you can't. And I'm not sure, I feel like that's something that changed with me this weekend. But we'll see whether I stay on the tracks or off the tracks. I don't know, but something definitely resonated with me as well this weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, and beyond the track is not easy, right? And imagine, and you can just see how much, thank you, Jessica, sharing as much as like you just did. And even for you now, graduated from college and you're still, kind of, and imagine like, we were trying to take this topic and present it to high schoolers. So our goal wasn't to just like have this level of conversation because we're at a different stage in our lives than the high schoolers are. Like they haven't even started to get on a track. So
Definitely.
this is why like this conversation is good to bring up as soon as you can. So these high schoolers don't have to go through something or be on a track and then like us get to a point where we start questioning like what we just like the track that we've been on. Like
Mhm.
this is the whole goal of Nishaan, is to have these conversations beforehand before you get on this track. So you don't have like some people might regret what they're doing, or might some people be like, oh, I never even thought to explore this, or I didn't even think this was a possibility. So that's why like it's good to think about, beyond the track as much as you can even can. So Praveena,
Mhm.
I'll throw it to you. You've shared a little bit about like, you just graduated, you talked about like, the track you're kind of on. Like, just open up more about talking about, the track you chose, why you chose it, and is it like something that, self-motivated, or, outside motivated, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, so I'm on the pre-med track, one of the big three. And Nishan weekend definitely had me thinking introspectively a lot. And at first it was really because I heard what a lot of kids in our community hear: doctor, engineer, lawyer. And I was like, doctor seems cool. I guess I'll go that route. So for a long time, I was just going through the motions. At Davis, I was an NPB major, and anyone who goes to Davis knows that that is the pre-med major that most people choose. And it wasn't really until maybe my latter half at Davis where I really got into mental health. I really got into neurology. Since graduating, I've been working in a clinical psychology lab where I work with people with serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and I just got more and more and more and more into it. And I was like, did I just find my niche? That medicine isn't something that I'm just going through the motions anymore. It's something that I actually want to do. And so it's something that really started out as not really my choice, that absolutely has become a passion, just because I've met so many people who are like, yeah, we need more Punjabi speaking professionals in the mental health field, because mental health is in our community. People in our community face those difficulties, but there's not a lot of us in that specific field. And when someone comes in, say, who doesn't speak English very well, they'll bring in sometimes people who speak Hindi as kind of a good enough interpreter, because there's no one who speaks Punjabi who's available. And so even being on the track per se, you still get what I would call critiques as to, oh, you're on the track, but you're not on the track enough as you should be. People have these ideal timelines of, oh, you graduate high school, you get college done in 4 years, and boom, you go straight to medical school. I did college in 6 years. I'm in my 3rd gap year, and by the time I get to med school, it might be 4 or 5 gap years. And I've heard, people in our community say, well, why are you taking so long? Even just choosing something like psychiatry, people are like, well, why don't you do cardiology? It makes more money. Why don't you do neurosurgery? It makes more money. So a big thing I took from this weekend is, even within the tracks that everyone's always talking about, there's a certain way to be on the track to meet everyone's expectations. And instead of putting all that pressure on yourself, instead of carrying the weight of those expectations, it's like, do what you want to do, because even if you're on a track that people think is desirable, 9 times out of 10 you're not going to be the perfect pre-med. So it's like, just do you. And people having that energy all weekend was just really rejuvenating to me.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a very key point about finding a middle ground. I think sometimes we get lost in trying to find that middle ground, and sometimes we let outside motivation motivate us more than our self motivation, and you won't know what's best for you until you try something out. like you can always think like, oh, maybe this will be best for me or this will be best for me, but like until you do it, you won't know what that actually means or anything. And this like false narrative of you do high school, you do your undergrad in 4 years, you do your grad school in 4 years, immediately following. It's like you do grad school like immediately following, but it's difficult to even get into a grad school these days. It's not as easy as it's made out to be. And sometimes some people are just not ready to jump straight into a grad school, right? Because a 4 year of undergrad, like I'm in my last year of my undergrad. So and then, with this pandemic, it's been a whole different ride of an undergrad, like nothing comparable to like anybody like that's come before. And it's like, and that's in terms of like outside settings, right? And nothing to do with like my own personal journey, right? So it's just been difficult, and I'm like burnt out to a point where I'm just like, just to keep telling myself only a couple more months, and then I'll be done with my undergrad, and we'll see what happens after that. But Mokul, I just want you to, because you are third year in college, like you said, and you already said you're already starting to you had these conversations even before Nishaan. So I just want it's always good to have these conversations, right? But what's something that you took away, or like, talk a little bit about your track that you had maybe going into it, maybe you're kind of questioning it now, or like what's your track right now?
Yeah, so I'll kind of talk about my like track, kind of where I'm at first, and then I'll kind of connect it back to what the weekend was like. So actually originally when I got into UCLA, I'm studying economics, but I was originally bio. I was on that pre-med track. But I had switched pretty much week 0 before school even started, because that whole summer I kind of spent reflecting like, man, do I really want to do this? Because my whole life I'd grown up hearing it, and in turn convinced myself that I had to be a doctor, and like this is the only thing that I'd be able to do, and like it was the only like right thing to do, I guess. And so that at the start of like my freshman year, I'd kind of moved into a space where I kind of considered myself a creative or in that area. And so I got involved with like marketing and advertising orgs and positions where I could get like experience with that. And but lately, like I mentioned, I had talks with Harmon prior to the weekend. I've been sitting in my economics classes now, like where the low level job example is always like, or a simple example to help explain theory is always the Uber driver. And like my dad used to drive for Uber. My dad drove a taxi for like 25 years, something like that. And it's crazy to think that like the theory that they're teaching at these institutions kind of governs the livelihoods of people like my dad, but kind of boils them down to just a variable, or doesn't really kind of just one variable at that, and sometimes doesn't even include their experience at all. And so specifically like one class that I'm taking right now, organizational economics, has like a lab aspect to it where we analyze like businesses, and corporate execs come and facilitate discussions. And it's really, the conversations that we've had in those classes really have opened my eyes to how disconnected these execs are, and also even peers and my classmates are, to like my personal lived experiences and my family's experiences. And it's kind of made me question, like, is this like something that I really want to actively be like perpetuating, I guess, like, And so to kind of connect it back to the weekend, the beyond the track aspect really confirmed, I mean, the timing was really perfect too, like having just had these conversations with Harmon, it really confirmed for me that where I belong is kind of beyond this track. And to take it even one step further, I would consider that like business is the next step in that ladder. I think maybe like doctor, lawyer, engineer, business. I'm not sure. That's just how I would put it. But it doesn't really stop there. And like the work that Jakara movement is doing, whether that be with the community directly or conferences like Nishaan and things like that, that's something that I've kind of really felt aligned to this weekend. And their work really is inspiring me and kind of what I want to do. And I'm definitely still finding myself and like where I want to go from here, but like based on the experiences I've had even in the past few months alone, are really kind of shaping what kind of is to come next.
Yeah, and again, like I said, I've been a part of Jakara for numerous of years now, and when I started, I could count like all like the community organizers on one hand. That's how few they were. And now like I want to say it's around like 13, 14, 15 community organizers, but on top of that, there's you have your labor rights Jakara team, you have your housing Jakara team, you have your redistricting Jakara team. So there's so many other like job opportunities that have been created. Even now, there's more job positions open in Jakara. So like there's still so much left to expand to, and we're just reaching like the climax of this, because like I said, in the last 3 or 4 years is how many like previously as how many of these jobs have opened up, and as we go further along, just more of these opportunities are going to open, and that's not just going to be only in Jakarta, but that's always like also in our community as a whole, because there will be other organizations, there will be other um orgs that come into the space or like try to expand the space just as Jakarta has done, and they've kind of laid out a kind of a groundwork for it. So this in our community is so like we kind of underestimate how large our community is. Punjabi is the third most spoken language in the Central Valley, behind English and Spanish. So it's like that just goes to show you like how many Punjabis are in the Central Valley, and that number just gets bigger as you include the Bay Area, you include SoCal. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in our communities, and it's events like Nishaan, it's events like Lilkar, which is our collegiate conference that happens in June. These are the events that kind of help young folks like ourselves, and even high schoolers, and even folks that are past college, kind of get back and do work for the community. And that's something that when I was picking what I wanted to do as a career or whatever, this didn't exist as a career option, or I didn't even think about this being a career option. But seeing how much like work has been done in the last couple of years, it's being viable that this is a field, this is a career path that you can choose, and you can still survive. Like the money's obviously, there's going to be better jobs out there with better pay. That's always going to be something. Even if you go down any route that you do go end up on, there's only some jobs that you get like the higher like epsilon of like money. But other than that, like you're always going to be searching for the higher paying job. And especially in this field, it should be like you should value the work more than the pay. And that's how you like we try to that's what I was preaching to like my high schoolers or anybody that I was speaking to. Like, I was like, money is always going to be there. Like, there's different ways to source income, not just through your own job. There's other sources of income that you'll find as you grow up. So just don't let that be the main reason why you get into a job or you go follow a career, because at the end of the day, like you'll get bored or you'll get frustrated or you'll live in regret of what happens if you didn't really enjoy the journey or enjoy what you're doing, but you just looked at the dollar signs at the end of the day. So that's what I would like. That's what I took away from the weekend, and this is what I've been taking away for like the last couple of years since I've joined Jakarta. And like Mokul, like you said, like there's so many opportunities even now that are open, and then just going in the future there'll just be more opportunities like these that open up. But I think that was kind of, I know we can talk forever about Nishaan, and we can talk about forever of like what Jakarta means to each of us, what like all these experiences, all the stories that we heard. But we are hitting almost like I think past an hour almost now. But I just want to say thank you to all three of you guys for taking time out of your guys' busy schedules and joining me and hopping on this episode. It's really, I think you three kind of embody what Jakarta is trying to do going forward, is bring in people from different walks. Like Mokul, you're still in your undergrad. Jessica, you just graduated. Praveena, you've graduated and had a couple gap years, so you're kind of removed from college and school, but however they're like you still were brought into Jakarta in some fashion. And that's something that I think speaks volumes, is like all three of us have all three of you guys have different like points in like life right now, but you guys are all a part of Jakarta, and you guys were all a part of Nishaan. But if there's anything any of you guys want to say, maybe closing statements, anything you guys want to share, lastly, any like closing remarks of Nishaan? If not, then we can just end it.
I think one thing that I wanted to say is just for like the high schoolers that might be listening in and kind of debating whether or not to go to Nishaan, or coming back to Nishaan, or even coming back as volunteers or facilitators, like specifically for high schoolers right here. But I think that looking back at it, not having been a participant of Nishaan at all, just kind of coming in first time facilitating, I think that I really wish, like I mentioned this before, that I had these conversations as a high schooler. My friends did, like people from my community did, and um, I encourage them to just engage as much as they can at the event, and then take the things that they're learning and discussing about and extend that to their community and continue it in like the things they're doing at their high schools or whatever is that might be. But just make the most of those experiences because like they're really irreplaceable. Even at like looking backwards as a facilitator, it's a really unique experience.
Yeah, I mean, like bouncing off of that, the conversations that we had in these spaces weren't easy. I mean, there were a lot of, awkward silences and deep silences. And but just being vulnerable in these spaces and seeing that, students were open to having these kinds of dialogue, it kind of made me hopeful for like the next generation that, that we are willing to introspect and look within us and, start to see where we can break these intergenerational cycles and the work that we can do. But yeah, this weekend was inspirational to me too. Like I think, you can feel the energy, you can feel the love, and it gives you hope for the next generation to see how, we'll come out having had talked about these things.
Yeah, and just echoing those points, if you're feeling hesitant about going, if you don't know anyone coming in, definitely I would say take the plunge and do it and come to a Nishaan, because that connection you feel with everyone, that welcoming kind of environment that's created, the conversations we had, the relationships that you make, the mentorship you can get from your peers and from others is just something that's invaluable. So there's really only things that you can gain by coming to Nishaan.
Yeah, totally. And I'll just speak quickly about that. As I think Nishaan for high schoolers is unique, but because there's nothing else out there during your high school years like it. You won't have this opportunity to go away for a weekend, to go stay at a hotel for a couple of nights with your friends from your high school or from wherever. Or if you're coming as like knowing nobody and you're like worried about how I'll be accepted. I know the three of you shared like this was your first time. It was daunting coming in, but like you guys were immediately welcomed and immediately felt like you guys were at home, and never for a second when you guys were there question anything about like, oh, I'm not welcomed here, or I feel uncomfortable. And it's like you hit the ground running and you were just immediately just, and even like a random stranger that doesn't know you yet just starts opening up or starts talking to you or wants to get to know you. So like that's what Nishaan is. And that's what, even for if for those high schoolers that are your seniors and this was your last Nishaan, look into the Lakar, which is in June, which is our collegiate conferences, where the topics are a little bit more in depth, a little bit deeper, but allows you to kind of reconnect with those folks that you met at Nishaan, maybe that are like also seniors that are graduating at the end of this school year. And then you can build those relationships as well as meeting new people, because we have a lot of differing people that come to Nishaan, and we have a lot of people that only come to the Lakar. So it's always a great experience for both of them. And like looking back at my years with Jakara, like those are the two times that like I can say like I can look back at that year, and those are like the two highlights of my year. Is in the beginning of the year we have Nishaan, in the middle of the year we have Lakar, and like both of them are just amazing because it's just basically Nishaan, but just for college people. So it's just like that one step you can get a little bit more freedom. You're going to get a little bit more deeper conversations. And yeah, so definitely look out for that if you're a high school senior and you're graduating, and feel free to, always reach out to our podcast here. We can always, help with anybody, and I'm always free to help and talk to anybody and support anybody for a future episode. Please contact us. We'll love to have, you come on and share your experiences. If anybody's, part of Nishaan wants to come on and talk about their experience. But yeah, this is on YouTube. I hope you guys enjoyed the video version. And if you're listening on our audio platforms, again, thank you for the constant downloads. And yeah, we're on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. So if you any of those, and on a different podcast platforms. So if you use any of the different podcast platforms, you can find us on there. Just look up the JMC Chronicles. We pop up on all of those sites. But without further ado, I think that's going to do it for me. I just want to say one last thank you to you three for joining again. And I think this episode was really, really for me eye-opening, because again, like I said, I can get caught up in like going through the process because this was my fifth one, but seeing it from like a first person like a point of view for like the first time kind of refreshes everything for me. It makes me excited for the future. But yeah, with that, I'll say goodbye and Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.